A cold wind sliced through the pines, carrying the faint scent of damp earth and regret. Tom Hargrove trudged along the overgrown trail, his boots sinking into the mud with each weary step. The forest was quiet, save for the occasional snap of a twig underfoot or the distant call of a crow. At 42, Tom felt older than his years, his back ached from years of hauling lumber, his hands were calloused, and his heart carried a weight heavier than any load he'd ever lifted. His wife, Ellen, had left him 3 years ago, taking their savings and leaving behind a stack of bills and their 8-year-old son, Caleb. Tom was a man who learned to keep going, even when the world seemed hell-bent on breaking him. The sun hung low, painting the sky in bruised shades of purple and orange. Tom had taken Caleb out to the woods behind their small Oregon town for a rare day off, hoping to teach him how to fish in the creek like his own father had taught him. Caleb, with his mop of brown hair and curious green eyes, had been chattering about school, about the new superhero movie, about anything to fill the silence Tom often left hanging. But now, Caleb was a few paces ahead, poking at the underbrush with a stick, while Tom carried their fishing gear, his mind drifting to the overdue rent notice taped to their fridge. "Dad, look." Caleb's voice cut through the haze. Tom glanced up, expecting to see a squirrel or maybe a deer. Instead, Caleb was pointing at something deeper in the woods, off the trail, where the trees grew thick and the shadows clung like cobwebs. Tom squinted, his stomach tightening. There, maybe 50 yards away, was a flash of color, something that didn't belong. 2 small figures, huddled together, their clothes tattered and dirt-streaked, stood against a massive oak. Chains glinted in the fading light, snaking around the tree and binding their wrists. Tom's breath caught. "Caleb, stay here," he said, his voice low but firm. He dropped the fishing rods and moved forward, his heart pounding. As he got closer, he saw them clearly. Twin girls, no older than 10, their faces pale and streaked with grime. Their blonde hair was matted, their eyes wide with fear. The chains were rusted, padlocked to the tree, cutting into their thin wrists. They were shivering, their breaths coming in shallow gasps. "Hey," Tom said softly, raising his hands to show he meant no harm. "I'm not gonna hurt you. My name's Tom. What's going on here?" The girls stared at him, their eyes darting between him and the ground, as if expecting a trap. The one on the left, slightly taller, clutched her sister's arm. "It's okay," Tom said, kneeling to their level. "I'm gonna get you out of this." Caleb's footsteps crunched behind him. "Dad, who are they? Why are they tied up?" His voice trembled, and Tom shot him a look that said, "Stay back." "I don't know, buddy," Tom said, his mind racing. He pulled his phone from his pocket, no signal. Of course. They were miles from town, deep in the national forest where cell towers were a pipe dream. He studied the chains. The padlock was old but sturdy, the kind you'd need a bolt cutter for. He didn't have one. His toolbox was back in the truck, a good half-hour hike away. The taller girl finally spoke, her voice barely a whisper. He said he'd come back. Her eyes flicked to the woods, as if expecting someone to emerge from the shadows. "Who?" Tom asked, keeping his tone calm despite the rage bubbling in his chest. "Who did this to you?" The girls exchanged a glance, fear sealing their lips. The shorter one whimpered, pressing closer to her sister. Tom's mind spun with possibilities, none of them good. Human trafficking, a deranged hermit, some sick cult. He'd heard stories about the dark corners of these woods, whispered over beers at the local bar. Missing hikers, strange lights, things no one could explain. He pushed the thoughts aside. Focus. These girls needed him now. "Caleb, run back to the truck," Tom said. "Grab the toolbox. Hurry, but be careful." Caleb hesitated, his eyes wide, but nodded and took off, his small frame disappearing down the trail. Tom turned back to the girls. "What's your names?" "I'm Lily," the taller one said. "This is Rose." Rose's lip trembled, but she didn't speak. "Okay, Lily, Rose. I'm gonna figure this out. You're safe now." He hoped he sounded convincing. He tugged at the chains, testing their strength. The metal bit into the tree's bark, and the girls winced as the links shifted against their raw skin. Whoever did this had meant to keep them here, maybe for good. Tom's mind flashed to Caleb, alone on the trail. He didn't like it, but he couldn't leave these girls. He scanned the woods, his ears straining for any sound, a branch snapping, a voice. Nothing but the wind. He needed to act fast. "Hang on," he told them, digging through his backpack. He pulled out a pocket knife, useless against the chains but maybe enough to pry at the lock. He worked at it, his hands steady despite the adrenaline. The lock was stubborn, rusted shut. Sweat beaded on his forehead. Minutes dragged on, each one heavier than the last. Lily watched him, her eyes sharp despite her fear. "You got a kid," she said, glancing toward the trail where Caleb had gone. "Yeah," Tom said, not looking up. "Caleb. He's 8. You're a good dad," she said quietly. The words hit Tom like a punch. He didn't feel like a good dad, not when he could barely pay the bills, not when Caleb ate cereal for dinner some nights because it was all they had. He swallowed the lump in his throat and kept working. Finally, he heard Caleb's footsteps. The boy burst through the trees, dragging the toolbox, his face red from the effort. "Got it," he panted. Tom grabbed the box, rifling through it until he found a small crowbar. It wasn't a bolt cutter, but it might do. He wedged it into the lock, grunting as he applied pressure. The girls flinched at the sound of metal grinding against metal. With a final heave, the lock snapped open, and the chains fell to the ground with a dull thud. Lily and Rose collapsed against each other, rubbing their wrists. Tears streamed down Rose's face, but Lily held her tight, whispering something Tom couldn't hear. He stepped back, giving them space. "Can you walk?" he asked. They nodded, though their legs wobbled as they stood. Tom slung his backpack over his shoulder and picked up the toolbox. "We're going to my truck. I'll get you to a hospital, get you warmed up." "Okay." They didn't answer, just followed him, clinging to each other. Caleb stayed close, his eyes darting between the girls and the woods. The hike back felt endless, the forest growing darker with every step. Tom kept his senses sharp, half expecting someone to jump out from behind a tree. The girl's story was a blank, and that scared him more than anything. Who had done this? Were they still out there? At the truck, Tom wrapped the girls in an old blanket from the back seat. Caleb climbed in beside them, quiet for once. Tom started the engine, the heater blasting warm air. "We're gonna take care of you," he said, glancing at them in the rearview mirror. Lily met his eyes, her expression unreadable. Rose was staring out the window, her face blank. The drive to town was slow, the dirt road winding through the forest before hitting the highway. Tom's mind churned. He couldn't take them straight to the police. Small-town cops weren't equipped for something like this, and he didn't trust them to handle it right. The hospital was the better bet. They'd call on the authorities, get the girls checked out. But what then? Foster care? Tom knew the system. He'd grown up in it after his mom died. It wasn't kind to kids like Lily and Rose. At the hospital, the ER was a blur of fluorescent lights and clipped voices. Nurses whisked the girls away, and a doctor peppered Tom with questions he couldn't answer. "I found them in the woods," he kept saying. "Chained to a tree." The words sounded insane, even to him. A social worker arrived, a tired-looking woman named Janet who scribbled notes as Tom recounted the story. Caleb sat in the waiting room, swinging his legs, a vending machine soda clutched in his hands. Hours later, Janet pulled Tom aside. "The girls are dehydrated, malnourished, but they'll be okay physically. Mentally, it's too early to tell. They're not talking much. No ID, no missing persons reports matching their description. We're running their prints." But she trailed off, her eyes heavy with the weight of cases like this. "You did good, Mr. Hargrove." Most people would have walked away. Tom didn't feel like a hero. He felt helpless. What happens to them now? Temporary foster placement, most likely. "We'll try to find family, but if no one comes forward," she didn't finish. She didn't need to. Tom glanced at Caleb, who was watching him from across the room. He thought of Lily's words, "You're a good dad." He wasn't so sure. But he couldn't shake the image of those girls, chained and alone. He'd been alone too, as a kid, bouncing from home to home, never feeling wanted. He couldn't let that happen to them. Over the next few days, Tom couldn't stay away. He visited the hospital, bringing comic books for the girls and sneaking in snacks Caleb picked out. Lily started talking more, telling him bits and pieces. Their mom had died years ago. Their stepdad, Lily's voice shook when she mentioned him, had taken them into the woods after a fight. "He said we were a burden," she whispered. "Said he'd teach us a lesson." Rose still barely spoke, but she'd started drawing, filling pages with dark, jagged lines. The police found no trace of the stepdad. No name, no address, just a ghost in the woods. Tom's anger grew, but so did something else, a need to protect these girls, to give them something better than what he'd had. He talked to Janet, to lawyers, to anyone who'd listen. He wasn't rich, wasn't stable, wasn't anything special. But he had a spare room, a steady job, and a son who'd already started calling Lily and Rose the sisters. The process was grueling: background checks, home visits, stacks of paperwork. Tom's boss gave him time off, and the guys at the lumberyard chipped in for groceries, clothes, even a bunk bed. The town rallied, moved by the story of the man who'd found two girls chained to a tree and refused to let them go. Caleb, too, became their fiercest advocate, teaching them how to play catch, sharing his toys, his room, his dad. Months later, Tom stood in a courtroom, his hands shaking as he signed the papers. Lily and Rose were his, legally, permanently. The judge, a stern woman with kind eyes, looked at him. "You're giving them a second chance, Mr. Hargrove." Not many would. That night, Tom tucked the girls into their new bunk bed. Caleb was sprawled on the floor, reading a comic aloud. Lily smiled, a real smile, not the guarded one she'd worn in the woods. Rose reached for Tom's hand, her small fingers curling around his. "Thank you," she whispered, her first words to him. Tom's throat tightened. He wasn't a hero, wasn't perfect. But as he looked at his three kids, his family, he felt something he hadn't in years. Hope. The world was still cruel, still heavy. But here, in this small house, with these three kids who needed him, he'd found something worth fighting for. And that was enough.